the surroundings that we are in this situation. And so we're not going to read the whole chapter right now, but as we go along in the message, we're going to read the group of verses as we go in our points this morning. So we're going to actually read the whole chapter of Daniel, chapter 6, which has 28 verses. So if you are living in the Old Testament, they would read not chapters, but books. And they would stand. And nowadays, sometimes when we ask everyone to stand for the scripture readings, we feel that I don't want to stand. But that's how they do. And today we're going to read and study and look at those verses. So let's look into this story of Daniel and see the choices that he made for him to be positive about life despite challenges, despite all the difficulties that he will experience or that he has experienced in life against the enemies. So the first one, we're going to go right to the first point, which is Daniel chose character over comfort. He chose character over comfort, and then we're going to see that in verses 1 to 3 of Daniel chapter 6. Daniel chose to do the most with the situation where he is at the present, rather than complaining about the ones that he don't have. So read with me verses 1 to 3 of Daniel chapter 6. I'll be reading from the New International Version. It pleased Darius, or some translation when they read audibly, Darius, but I'm just going to say Darius. So it pleased Darius to appoint 120 satraps to rule throughout the kingdom, with 3 administrators over them, one of whom was Daniel. The satraps were made accountable to them so that the king might not suffer loss. Now Daniel so distinguished himself among the administrators and the satraps by his exceptional qualities that the king planned to set him over the whole kingdom. Now, before going through the details of these 3 verses, Daniel was not in his homeland during this time. He was a captive. He was a victim of a disobedient nation, Israel. That's why they were brought to Babylon to serve pagan gods. But Daniel, because of his faith, because of his relationship with the Lord, he was able to adjust himself. He was able to prepare himself for whatever situation that he might encounter in life. And reading verses 1 to 3, we'll see that it is a great opportunity, right? He was chosen as one of the administrators. There were 120. If you're wondering what satraps are and prefects, satraps are governors. They are administrators. They are part of the leaders, like for now maybe they're the Congress or the Senate. And they rule and they guide all the provinces where the king is ruling. Satrap is more of the military advisors and the generals and treasurers and finance and all these areas in the kingdom. And these are the group of people that Daniel is working with. And he is the only person that know God and that fears God, and the rest, they don't. And Daniel has all the reason, he has all the rights to complain and said, I shouldn't be here. I should be in my country with my fellow Israelites, being comfortable with them, studying the Bible with them and reading and just, having good time. And now I'm here being pressured with all these responsibilities that I'm not supposed to do. But that was not Daniel's attitude. He welcomed it as an opportunity to stand for the Lord. And in verse 3, it's very striking. Now Daniel so distinguished himself among the rest of the administrators. What does it mean? He so distinguished himself. It means that Daniel lived with integrity. He cannot compromise. He did not compromise in spite of all the pressure that is being brought to him. He was in a place where people don't worship God. They don't even know who God is. But because of the marks of his distinction, it brought out something that the rest of the satraps and the rest of the governing body of the kingdom got so jealous. And they were so enraged, and they were so uncomfortable. They were so insecure that there's one person that can't go with us. You know, if you are in the world today, especially when you are in a government office, somebody said that if you want to be as far as you want from God, be or work in the government. I don't know, maybe you can translate that in your own mind. But that's how they said, if it's true. There are people that are in the government that are honest and standing. One of them, of course, is here with us. We're studying his life. And when Daniel experienced the pressure, he did not focus on his surroundings. He focused on his heart, how he will respond to God, because he is honest in his heart. And with that, I want to share with you what I read a while ago about a guy or a man or a father who wrote to the Internal Revenue Services, the IRS. Letter, dear sirs, last year, when I filed my income tax return, I deliberately misrepresented my income. And now I cannot sleep. So enclosed is a check for $150 for taxes. And then he said, P.S., if I cannot sleep still, I'll send the rest. A lot of people forget that the external challenges have been allowed by God in our lives so that He can help us evaluate our walk before Him. And that's Daniel. He chose character over comfort. He chose pushing himself instead of complaining about what he doesn't have. And that distinguished him, and that will also distinguish us if we live for God that way. The second is Daniel chose discipline over disorder. And we'll see that in verses 4 to 9 of our passage. At this, administrators and the satraps tried to find grounds for charges against Daniel and his conduct of government affairs. But they were unable to do so. They could find no corruption in him because he was trustworthy and neither corrupt nor negligent. Finally, this man said, we will never find any basis for charges against him or against this man Daniel unless it has something to do with the law of his God. Verse 6, so these administrators and satraps went as a group to the king and said, may King Darius live forever. The royal administrators, prefects, satraps, advisors, and governors have all agreed that the king should issue an edict and enforce a decree that anyone who prays to any god or human being during the next 30 days, except to you, your majesty, shall be thrown into the lion's den. Now, your majesty, issue the decree and put it in writing so that it cannot be altered, in accordance with the law of the Medes and Persians, which cannot be repealed. So King Darius put the decree in writing. What do you think? What comes to your mind? What are you trying to think while I'm reading this, or while, I don't know if you happen to read Daniel chapter 6. This group of verses from 4 to 9, what is coming to your mind? Now, first of all, in verses 1 to 3, especially verse 3, Daniel so distinguished himself. So he laid down his card. He said, this is me. It's not going to change. I'm not going to compromise. And in verses 4 to 9, that's exactly what happened. They took notice and they fixed their eyes on him and said, we're going to find something wrong with this man, corruption, whatever evil, we'll find out, and then they failed. There's nothing that they could accuse Daniel of doing anything wrong in his office. Can you imagine an administrator of 120 leaders, natives of Babylon, and they couldn't find anything. So they said, okay, let's meet without Daniel. He can't be in this meeting. And they met. And they made the decision that, hey, there's nothing we can find in his integrity. So I heard, maybe one of them said, that he prays 3 times a day. So let's find out, let's check it out. And then that's where we're going to find. And then they made a decree. They passed a law that no one can pray to any other gods, because Daniel, they knew that he was a Jew. He came from Israel. And then they said, unless it's about his God. Now my question to us is that how your coworkers view you at workplace? That they cannot find any accusations in your life, and that they would see, and that they would find a way to destroy you because of your faith? Because nowadays, if you're at workplace and you mention, especially a secular workplace, if you mention religion or Jesus or God, you are politically incorrect and you will be in trouble. And you're maybe reasoning out, well, our time today is not as Daniel's time. No, it's not. It's the same. He could lose his job. He could also be kicked out if he boldly speaks of his faith. But he trusted in God, who is more powerful than any company, any administration. And he trusted God. So, it was so striking how Daniel described the situation. His faithfulness was so clear that they couldn't find anything against him except his religion, his relationship with God. So, Daniel's principle in life is that I'll do my job faithfully because God is watching me. And he knew also, Daniel is aware that everybody's watching him, around him, and that's also very important to us. And so now his life is in danger, but he disciplined himself. He didn't panic. He said, I will keep doing what I'm doing. And that brings us to the next, which is he chose love over life. He could have said, you know what? It's only 30 days. It wouldn't hurt, right? I could skip praying for 30 days. And maybe I'll be pressured to do that. And for me not to be compromised, for me not to lose my job, okay. But not Daniel. So verses 10. Now when Daniel learned that the decree had been published, there's nothing he can do about the decree because it was signed by the king. And when the king signs and put his signet ring, that cannot be revoked. So, what did Daniel do? He went home to his upstairs room where the windows opened toward Jerusalem. 3 times a day, he got down on his knees and prayed, giving thanks to his God just as he had done before. If Daniel was not consistent in his prayer life, he could have been easily swayed and stopped and said, okay, I'll give in because 30 days will not hurt. But no. Then these men went as a group and found Daniel praying and asking God for help. Now, if you're trying to work your imagination on this, we're thinking, how can they find it out? That Daniel has no privacy. They can just go in his house and peek and look at what he's doing and he's praying. But that's exactly what they did. They went as a group and found Daniel praying. Whatever way they made, maybe they sent a messenger and said, hey, can you look for us? If Daniel is really praying, and then the messenger will come back and say, yeah, he's really praying. So they went to the king. Now it's time to report to the king. And spoke to him about his royal decree. And then they said, did you not publish a decree that during the next 30 days, anyone who prays to any god or human being except to you, your majesty, would be thrown into the lion's den? So remember, when they made the law, they already had the punishment set up. And the punishment is, whoever prays to other god except you, O king, or your majesty, for 30 days will be thrown into the lion's den. That is the penalty of violating the decree. And they said that. And they were able to convince the king to write and to seal it and to approve it. And then the king answered, the decree stands. Without knowing that, they were setting up Daniel, of course, in accordance with the law of the Medes and Persians, which cannot be repealed. Then they said to the king, there's a man, one of the administrators, Daniel, who is one of the exiles. Actually, they didn't say who's one of the leaders and the administrators, but they said, one of the exiles from Judah pays no attention to you, your majesty, or the decree you put in writing. He still prays 3 times a day. When the king heard this, he was greatly distressed, and he was determined to rescue Daniel and made every effort until sundown to save him. Let's pause for a moment there. Do you think King Darius is saved? Do you think he is a follower of God? I'm just throwing that question. You can answer that no, yes, maybe. But the fact that he was trying to rescue Daniel from the decree that he just made, he knew Daniel, right? He knew Daniel. He wants to promote him. He wants to put him in a place where he will be higher than the rest of the leaders. So that's the struggle in his life. If he is an evil king, he would say, okay, go ahead, throw him in the lion's den. He's not obeying. Just like Nebuchadnezzar in the same book, when Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego did not bow down to the idol, the golden idol that was made for him, the king said, throw them in the fire furnace. But here it's a different story. He was trying his best to rescue Daniel and made every effort until sundown, meaning he's not just pretending to pity Daniel and then trying to save him. It's real. It's real. Then the men went as a group to the king, or to King Darius, and said to him, so maybe the first time they went is just a few of them, but then when they feel that the king is trying to save Daniel, they brought everything. They brought everyone. Then the men went as a group to King Darius and said to him, remember, your majesty, that according to the law of the Medes and Persians, no decree or edict that a king issues can be changed. Excuse me. I want you to see here how the enemy is working. It's an old strategy. It's an ancient strategy. So if you're surprised that here in America today, you cannot just open your Bibles publicly and just share your faith, the gospel in the malls or everything, it's been going on for hundreds of years. It's not new. It's not new. And the strategy of the enemy is to stop us from praying. To stop us from serving the living God. To stop us from convincing people of their sins. And that his main goal is to make us unusable to God. So his strategy is, first of all, he would throw a lot of temptations on us. And most of the time, a lot of people would succumb to temptation, and then he would rejoice and said, you would spend the rest of your life struggling and being guilty and trying to work out your life. But then, like Daniel, when he's not successful in his first attempt, he would try his second attempt, which is to change the laws and make us, believers, the violators of the law. They would change the decree, just like what they did to Daniel. It wasn't the first decree in that kingdom, but because of Daniel's life, they were pushed to make another law that would put Daniel outside of it so that he was the only violator, so that he will experience and that he will be judged and he will die and he will be eaten by lions. That was the original plan. So stopping prayer in public is not new. We see that in the life of Daniel. They were so furious and they were so determined to stop him. Beloved, we are being accused by the world as haters. Those Christians, they hate us. But you know what? I don't hate them. I love them. It's just the action that God hates. God says man should not sleep with man, woman should not sleep with woman, and same sex should not be married. God said that. But if those persons will repent, God will save them. So we don't hate the person, we hate the deed. We hate the practice. And that's what God hates. So when God hates sin, we should agree with God that we hate sin. Just like the sin in our lives, that we need to agree that it is sin. And that's when God will extend His forgiveness. And unless you agree with God that what you did is sin, you cannot experience His full forgiveness. And so when Daniel knew that the test was in place, his love for God didn't diminish. It actually grew stronger. He said, I'm ready. I'll choose loving God than dying, because like the Apostle Paul, he said, for me to live is Christ and to die is gain. You kill me, I'll be with God in heaven. You let me live, I'll keep witnessing, I'll keep sharing the gospel with you, I'll keep living for Jesus. So they couldn't stop Daniel from praying. When he found that the decree is set, he went on with his activity with God. It's not a religious practice. It's his life. His praying morning, noon, and night is his life. It is not a display that he is religious, but he does that faithfully. So, in relation to that, how faithful are we in our prayer life? Our morning, noon, and night relationship with God, if there is actually that in this life. I usually do my devotion early in the morning, and that brings me through the day. And then I have a conversation with God during the day. And at night, before I close my eyes to sleep, I thank Him for the strength for the day and for the safety and for all the blessings that He has given me. Daniel knew that continuing in prayer will cost him his life, but he didn't stop. He kept praying. That's why he chose poise over panic, our next point. He knew his life was always preserved by God until the Lord was finished with him. Beginning from verse 16. So the king gave the order, and they brought Daniel and threw him into the lion's den. The king said to Daniel, "May your God, whom you serve, continually rescue you." A stone was brought and placed over the mouth of the den, and the king sealed it with his own signet ring and with the rings of his nobles, so that Daniel's situation might not be changed. Then the king returned to his palace, spent the night without eating and without any entertainment being brought to him, and he could not sleep. He couldn't sleep. At the first light of dawn, the king got up and hurried to the lion's den. When he came near the den, he called to Daniel, excuse me, in an anxious voice, Daniel, servant of the living God, has your God, whom you serve, bear with me, there's something there that doesn't really want to go out. Whom you serve continually, been able to rescue you from the lions? With an anguished voice, meaning that he really loved Daniel. For some reason, he's so close to Daniel that he said, hey, he was not able to sleep that night. He didn't eat dinner. He refused to be entertained, and anything that would bring his mind away from the situation. I believe he didn't sleep that night because early, like before the sun rose, before sunshine, he rushed to where Daniel was. And in verse 21, Daniel answered, May the king live forever. My God sent his angel, and he shut the mouths of the lions. They have not hurt me, because I was found innocent in his sight. Nor have I ever done anything wrong before you, your majesty. And the king, in verse 23, was overjoyed and gave orders to lift Daniel out of the den. And when Daniel was lifted from the den, no wound was found on him, because he had trusted in his God. Beloved, if there's one thing that I want you to bring home with you today, is that last phrase in verse 23. Nothing happened to Daniel. The lions didn't hurt him. God shut the mouths of the lions. Why? Because he trusted God. When we trust God, doesn't mean that we will always be protected. In one of the chapters of the book of Francis Chan, he described our prayer life, his prayer life. When he was young in the faith, he would always pray, God, please protect us. Please protect my kids. Please protect everyone. And then he came to realize, he said, yeah, I can pray that prayer always. But then what if, in the middle of my flight from California to somewhere in Asia, the plane crashes? Will I be disappointed, or will my loved ones be disappointed that God didn't protect me? But his point is, he said, when you pray for protection, you have to be ready for God to surprise you. Because sometimes he will not. Sometimes he will allow accidents to happen. But it doesn't mean that he is not protecting you. It doesn't mean that he forgets to be your God. He's still our God. So from now on, when you pray, when I pray, when I read that, it changed my prayer life. I always say, God, please protect my daughters, me, ICF family, and the leaders and everything. But it's according to what you have planned. If anything happened in between that, it's your will. It's your will. So that was the life of Daniel. He chose to be strong instead of panicking. And then Daniel chose rest over revenge. He was there in the lion's den, and he said that the lions didn't hurt me because I trusted in God. So whether God keeps us safe or not, we need to trust Him, like Daniel. And then he chose rest over revenge, verses 24 to 28. At the king's command, the men who had falsely accused Daniel were brought in and thrown into the lion's den, along with their wives and children. And before they reached the floor of the den, the lions overpowered them and crushed all their bones. While I was reading this, I'm thinking, Lord, can you do that to your enemies? There's no more Lions Den right now, but I heard testimonies about believers being